Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution, episode 32. And this one is called We Have to Talk About Retards. The reason for that will become apparent when I go into the solutions segment, which is shifting slightly away from the themes that I regularly have been doing of late. There's a potential because of that this episode could end up being a little bit long, so I'm going to have to try to avoid my normal umming and ahhing and staring off into the distance and all that sort of shit and just get on with it. So hopefully you've been having a half decent week, all things considered, and managing to get through all the bollocks. So anyway, as per usual, we start off with the main purpose, which is the Sisyphus complex solution itself, continuing to look through the Department of Government, where we are in the Department for Digital Media, Culture and Sport still. No, yes, Digital Media, Culture and Sport. Yeah, I think that's it. Right. So all of the culture-based stuff it's supposed to be, anyway. Right, so let's move into the first of the three that I'm going to be looking at. Right. Okay. I'll do the numbers in a slightly more I'm going to be reading a lot this time, and that's so I can get through it quicker. Right, so I'll do the numbers in a more comprehensible fashion than I possibly have done in previous episodes. The key thing about the numbers and that, realistically, and that is that so long as I understand what it is that I'm doing and my notes are right, then frankly it doesn't really matter that much. But it is helpful if I'm actually explaining myself better to you. Otherwise, a bit pointless me doing it in this way, isn't it? So basically what we've got with this particular department, the Imperial War Museums, we've got in blue, which is the which in normal circumstances would be considered the net contribution, because from their books, they're over that annual period of the 2019 to 2020, they're showing this net profit of the 3,253,000, all very well and good. However, in red, we've got the amount of money that they receive in grants from the DCMS. So that is better known as the taxpayer contribution, and that's the 22,822,000. So essentially what we have to do then is look at the cost to the taxpayer from this particular office is actually 19,569,000. So that is the tax burden for maintaining the Imperial War Museums for that one particular period. Like I say, I'm calculating stuff on that one annual year to make sure that everything is understood in terms of how it's operating on an annual basis. Once you've got through to the end, it doesn't really matter in terms of ones that are going to be kept in place. It will only matter if there's additional assets and things like that on any sort of recommended closures and things of that nature. So anyway, right, I'm pleased to say that whilst I do have issue with one particular article from the main web page of the Imperial War Museum, where they have this article that suggests that how the First World War changed women's lives, which, I mean, it's pretty stupid, really, isn't it? Because it sure as hell didn't change their lives compared to the mutilations suffered by the men. So, you know, I'll have a little bit of realism there. But I can say that aside from that particular little minor complaint, I think the standard type of review that I do of these things would suggest that apart from looking at what they're doing for any audit of waste, then essentially I'd not only keep these museums, but I'd actually add to them. So there's a strange one for you. That's an unusual one that I've not suggested previously. And essentially the reason what I'm suggesting in terms of adding to the museums is so that the kids for every part of the nation have a site that's within travel distance, so maybe like a 20-mile radius, and then it's part of their school curriculum so that they can get educated about what happens essentially when people become socialist retards. Because when you're talking about the wars, we've basically been fighting against socialist retards. So, you know, this is what happens. So, for each one of the museums, I mean, the one thing that I will add in that I've thought of, and that without having to refer to my notes on this, in terms of adding the number of museums, you don't have to literally physically start opening up new museums, because there's museums up and down the country, there's museums in most towns, so you're essentially opening up a network. So you can have these was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the core locations that are kept under this operation, but then you just essentially in that develop a network with the other museums around the country to set out this program that that basically what that means is then that you're not looking towards some great additional cost of having to buy new locations and set up new museums and things like that, because they already exist. So each of the locations could have an age appropriate learning program, and then as they're maybe throughout the ages of, because I think they start school, so you look 5 to 16 or 5 to 18, whatever it is. Set it out so that there's like three separate official curriculum-based visits, where the realities of war become a little bit harsher as they go into that third and final curriculum visit, so that people are actually these kids grow up in that and they're actually more understanding of what war really is all about, and how it's the effects across the board are not as simple as too many seem to not know anything about. So you can include within this type of thing, and so you've got, because obviously we've got the Churchill war rooms there. We can include some of the errors as well as the victories, and then the realities as well. So in terms of Churchill, we could actually turn around and express the truth that Churchill was indeed a eugenics freak. It's simple fact, he was. But the thing about it was that they can then introduce the further fact that when he was faced with the ideology of Hitler and the Nazis, he basically he could have just joined up with a whole many of the appeasers that we had in the UK, but he stood his ground against it and wanted the country to fight against what basically was an ideology that had an awful lot of the eugenics freakery involved within it. So he basically fought against something that he had necessarily believed in prior to that. So it is possible for people to be able to make that change, you know. So we can teach some of the realities as well. So again, with sticking with Churchill and that, because it is he is one of the key figures that most people like to piss and moan about these days because they don't know anything. We can also correct the bloody stupid lie of that the Bangladeshi starvation and the crap of blaming Churchill for that, you know, that's spread by socialist morons, because they tend to forget that this particular starvation that they're talking about happened in 1942, when he was rather busy with the war and all, and how the starvation resulted as a direct result of the Japanese invasion of Burma 6 months prior. So that was why the rice and the food and everything like that, the supply into Bangladesh, was cut off. So fuck all to do with Churchill. So, you know, these kinds of facts can be expressed. Yeah, we develop these kind of programs where we're making sure that the kids understand, they don't take things lightly. They understand that quite often stupid people do tend to create these scenarios and do it at the expense of everybody else, which is again rather a big problem with socialists and communists, obviously. You know, one leads to the other. So in terms of what these museums should be about, it's less about having some kind of "we won the war" bravado nonsense, though there's nothing wrong with that. But it's more to do with the lessons learned, and what should be a rather bloody obvious look at what the forebears did. You know, what your ancestors did in order for you little shits to be free. So you might actually start having a little bit more self-respect and a little bit more appreciation, and actually start to understand that you do have to actually work for your freedoms, which is particularly relevant just based on what we've been all having to put up with at the moment. So then you'll have a little bit more respect for what your ancestors did, or what other people's ancestors did if yours weren't involved, whatever. And when we are looking at respecting our forebears, which is a more pertinent term for these individuals, we're doing it in a much more realistic fashion, rather than the nonsense that we have over here of this every year you have like the poppy appeal by the I think it's the British Legion, I think they're called. I mean, everybody in the UK knows what the poppy is. People in other countries maybe don't, but it's supposed to be something where it is this memorial of the people that served and died in all wars, any war whatsoever. But unfortunately, that poppy appeal is used as a money. It's basically it's a scam for the British Legion to have loads of money where they really don't help in the way that they're supposed to. That money is supposed to be going towards helping the veterans, the guys that have actually fought and come back, been injured, things of this nature. It's supposed to be going towards them, and it doesn't. That again is a fact. Anybody in the UK that doesn't understand that, you might want to have a listen. And as much as I'm not overly keen on a lot of the stuff that the fella says these days, but have a listen to Jim Davidson. He can give you a lot of details as to why you should avoid the poppy appeal, and there's much better ways of being able to respect the people that fought for your freedoms and mine. So, Imperial War Museums, I don't care if there's a loss there. I don't care if there is a taxpayer burden there. I would do the obvious audit, like I said, make sure there's no waste, make sure everything is done correctly. But in terms of what the war museums are supposed to be about, this is something that needs to be kept, looked after, even at taxpayers' expense, and ideally have that program expanded so that the kids can actually have a little bit more respect for the lives that they lead, and the reason why they need to continue fighting for the freedoms that were gained on their behalf. So good, like them. Right, the next one. This one is a little bit of an unusual one. The Information Commissioner's Office. I do have something to say about this, and I have alluded to this one previously, of something that is still ongoing, but I'll go into a little bit of the detail on this today. So I'll just begin with the numbers again. Right, so from an accounting perspective, it does seem that straight away the first problem is that they don't seem to understand the accounting order, because they put the income and expenditure the wrong way around. But you know, you end up with the same result, but how that would actually get past an auditor is a little bit beyond me. I've never seen anybody be able to report accounts in anything other than a specific format. How they've been able to do that, don't really know. Anyway, right, so the three numbers that we got on screen this time. We've got the 5,046,000, which is their net loss position. So once again, we have to add in the grant in aid, which is the taxpayers' money. And that is counted within their income as 6,338,000. So essentially what the total taxpayer burden is here is 11,384,000 for this office. Right, in terms of what the office does, I've got the stuff on the screen and that for you to be able to see. It gives just a little bit of an overview of what they're supposed to be doing. And the key areas of interest are the register of fee payers and the legislation that they cover. Now, the legislation that they're covering is things like with the GDPR and data protection, freedom of information, things of this nature. I do understand that with the developments of the data economy, that an independent body with some knowledge in this area is required, particularly for oversight, especially when it comes down to consumer protection. But I do have some issues with the with a couple of areas. So the first problem I've got is in relation to this the register of fee payers, because essentially what this is a stealth tax on all companies, and this has been introduced from 2018 in the Data Protection Charges and Information Regulations 2018. So basically what that means is they charge all companies an annual fee, which does have a grading according to revenue, size of company and so forth. But it's stated in such a wide and varied way as to try to encompass literally everybody. So this tax will hit every single company. Insofar as I know, every company contacted so far is simply paying this fee without, it seems like they're doing so without the slightest thought as to whether there's any justification for it. Because I mean, as much as they do say that there are exemptions, you'd have to be essentially a company that's got no online presence, no customers, and no level of information as to what it is that you're doing at all, in order to be able to get around this. And so it's completely impractical. They are literally going to tax you no matter what. Now, I don't remember this being discussed with anyone. It just seems to have been brought in as a stealth tax. The amount of money, like I said, I mean, for a very, very small company, I think it goes down as low as something like around about £50 or something like that. But it doesn't matter. It's still a stealth tax. Now, the problem that I've got with this, in the fact that nobody seems to be really raising the complaints that they should be, I do have a case that, as I mentioned, and that I'd alluded to this in a previous episode, I can't remember which one, but I've got a case that's ongoing, and it's currently sitting with the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's Office, and it could have an impact because essentially what they're doing at the moment, they do seem to they've been going through a very long process where they're doing their best to try to cover up what was essentially a fuck up on their end. And the reason why it's going to end up being potentially relevant is because it could mean that the liability for this stealth tax might be avoidable for a number of different companies, and this is because it's based on the definition of who is a data controller and who is a data processor. Now, essentially, what the case boils down to is that there was a particular government office that had to make a determination via the Information Commissioner's Office as to whether this particular government office was actually the data controller or whether they were the data processor. And essentially they'd made this declaration that the government office was the data processor, by definition, because they said that they weren't the data controller. So you're either one or the other, or you're, like I said, you're literally just a completely non-existent entity that has no presence and no information on anyone. So I mean, with the particular government office that I've got the ongoing complaint with, there's no way that they can turn around to say that they are neither a controller or a processor, that it has to be one or the other. So they made the determination that they are the processor, which didn't and doesn't make any sense, because that then means that the particular organisation that was handling their data on a service-based contract, they have then suddenly become, by definition again, the data controller, which doesn't, according to all definitions, and I mean I've got it up on the screen, what is a data controller, what is a data processor, there's no way that would actually, the way that they've tried to push this, it goes in direct contravention to their own definition, because these definitions here come from the ICO. So what it means is if they do go forward and say that they were correct to make that determination, it basically means it sets a precedent whereby all companies out there that have been paying this fee can turn around and say, well, actually, no, I'm not the data controller, I'm simply the data processor, therefore I'm not liable for this. And you can say, well, you know, whether your servers or where you keep your information, and that, I mean, it's Microsoft, they're the data controller. It's Google that's the data controller. It's, you know, whoever. So it's, you know, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, could be some sort of a local firm, whatever. You say, no, they're the data controller, so therefore I don't have to pay that stealth tax. That's the implication that will take place if they set this precedent. And when it comes down to data, I mean, it does include things like CCTV as well. So anything that is collecting information, footage, anything at all that is kept for a period of time, despite the fact that you would be the organisation requesting the service, you're no longer the controller. So then you don't have to pay the stealth tax. Now, the thing about it is that if they then change their determination within the case that I've got with them at the moment, it will essentially mean that somebody within their office is going to be guilty of misconduct in public office for having made an incorrect determination. So they've done this in such a way to try to cover their own arses and hope that I'm as stupid as they clearly are. Well, they've actually misjudged that, which is why I am taking it as far as I am. And so their choice is to be done for misconduct or lose all of the revenue from having reversed the definitions of data controller and data processor. It's up to them. I don't mind. So the second problem I've got with the Information Commissioner's Office is how they do not include credit agencies within the same laws that apply to everybody else. And it goes a little bit further than that. It also has separate laws for the financial sector as a whole. So they are allowed to gain access and, in far too many occasions, abuse the most sensitive data that you can have, which is, you know, your finances. And the Information Commissioner's Office will do nothing about that. That is a distinct problem for me, and I'm not interested in these laws of one rule for thee and a different for me. In some ways I would end up solving this problem by the way of the fact that I would actually end the entire credit score system, the consumer-based credit score system, and I would do that because I find it absolutely disgraceful that there is a system in place that encourages consumer debt, because that's essentially all it's doing. And so that would be ended. So I could kind of deal with that problem separate to their lack of action in that particular area. So what I would end up looking towards doing that is having something that is having this particular office as something put together in a bit more of a robust fashion that does also envelop the financial sector as well, and just have a really good look at what this what the data regulations realistically should be, because I do think that GDPR as well, and that is it's confusing the hell out of people, and it's another one of these things, and that's been introduced in order to be able to screw people out of money. You know, it literally is as bad as that. But in terms of what constitutes private information, what doesn't, also the nonsense that you have, and that way you'll have like the post, you know, you'll have like a national post service over here, and that is literally just called the post office. It doesn't seem to stop them dropping all manner of crap through your door that has been sent by some criminal organisation that's basically trying to screw you out of money. You know, it's called junk mail basically, and that. But there's an awful lot of that type of stuff that ends up coming through your door. Well, you know, those postal services and that, they should surely be developing a list that says, right, where's this come from? Who the hell are they? What the hell are they doing? And that shouldn't really be going through people's doors. If you want to cut out that level of criminality, don't deliver it in the first fucking place. So there are certain issues around this particular office and what they can and can't do in terms of being a more effective route to recourse, I think, is probably the best way of putting it, rather than a regulator as such. But yeah, I would make sure that it was set up, and again, set up with something in that where they've if there is going to be some level of control over what data abuse, what the ramifications are for data abuse, I think there needs to be more teeth involved around that, because as the way things are set up with a lot of these different offices and that, they just it's pitifully it moves a pitifully slow process, and doesn't really help the little guy basically. So I do understand the need for this particular type of an office. I just don't agree with the way that it's being put together at the moment, and I certainly don't agree when they use it to protect other government departments by switching definitions. These types of areas and that would need to be looked at and reviewed and reformed. So, moving on, National Gallery. Okay, let's do the numbers again first. So, do the three-step process with this one as well. So there is the overall net gain of there is the overall net gain that they're producing, that the 38 million blah blah. Then you've got the amount of money that comes in from the grant in aid, and they've got that reported down as 24,770,000, which means essentially they are being a net contributor of £13,940,000. Good. Problem that I've got in terms of the way that they've reported this, and this is why I've got the actual segment of the income statement, and then they have a graph as well within the financial report where it suggests that granting aid makes up 48% of the income. Well, clearly it doesn't. I've put the red box around the amount of money that comes in from granting aid and via the taxpayer, and then you've got the total income of 82,380,000. So this is quite a big discrepancy, and so The issue then is that if you looked at the 82,380,000, that would mean that the total taxpayer contribution, if it were to be 48%, would actually have been £39,542,400 if the graph is being stated correctly. So then when you take that amount into consideration, what we would be looking at here is a net loss of 832,400. So that's quite a bit of a difference between a loss of this 830 odd thousand and then what they're reporting as a net, essentially the net gain of 13,940. So again, how do these types of things get through audit? How is it possible that people can report in this fashion and just be so blatantly wrong? So in terms of the operation itself, apart from, I mean, this I couldn't help but do it and that, but there is one rather strange little picture that I've got down the bottom here that goes on about how they do stuff around school visits, where presumably in that they'll be planning these school visits from African nations by all accounts, you know, if the picture's anything to go by. But anyway, that's their little bit of woke agenda appeasement contribution. So I'm not going to say that overall they're being presented in such a way as some of the other offices that we've looked at. They're not quite fully loaded in terms of ideological crap. So the other thing that I've noted with this particular gallery is that fortunately they do seem to be actually concentrating on I mean, you have to say, I know that art is supposed to be all subjective and all this sort of stuff and that, but they do seem to be concentrating very much on what I would consider to be actual art. So that you've got the picture up the top there and that, which is the Haywain. I mean, this is proper art. And I can say that because when you see some of the other galleries up and down the country, and you do wonder what fucking planet these people live on sometimes. Because I mean, like, there's the one fairly close to me and that, called the Turner Centre, and I've been there once and once only, and I'd never go again. And it had a local artist, Tracy Emin, I think her name is, and her supposed art. And my God, I mean, a mix between childlike and outright perverted at the same time. Just wrong on every level. But anyway, fortunately the National Gallery doesn't seem to be taking that particular kind of route. So overall, in terms of what it is the National Gallery does, I don't think I've got a major problem with them, put it that way. Apart from the accounting anomaly, which is a very strange one and critical to understand, because that is quite a wide difference in terms of the taxpayer proposition there. So aside from checking the numbers and seeing if there is any other way that any sort of the taxpayer's burden of at least this 24,770,000, whether that can be reduced, whether we do actually need to be in a position where we're continuously pumping money into the gallery. Is that necessary or not? This is just something that we'd look at, but overall I would say that there's not that big of a problem. So it's a bit of a fortunate one this week that we haven't had to go completely, I haven't had to go completely mental. I'll leave that for the solutions segment. So, right, the proposition that we have here, these are all the offices that I've done so far. The cumulative, you'll hopefully, anybody that is actually paying attention, you will notice has gone down a little bit, and that's because there's been, at least the reported net contributions. I'm not going to be doing it based on figures where, you know, I take that three-step proposition, or like with the National Gallery, that it does seem like that figure is incorrect. I'm not going to base it on those numbers. I'm just literally going to go with the end net position, just to make sure that it doesn't. Even though it would be a better, more accurate picture to use those figures, I want to go with the reported figures first, and then when you move into the RASIC stage and you're taking things forward into the next step and making your adjustments, at that point you can find out what the actual cost perspective would actually look like in reality. Hopefully you understand that. So basically what we're looking at here is just in terms of the policy developments. I'm going to have to rearrange this. I know I've said it several times, but I'm going to have to rearrange this at some point so it's a little bit more comprehensive. But we've got the review here of the Imperial War Museum, Information Commissioner's Office and the National Gallery, which is essentially what I would be doing in terms of taking this forward. So now we can get into the solutions part, which is going to be a bit longer than normal, and it is the reason why I've got the title this week of we have to talk about retards, because it's something that it's a slight play on a title of a well-known book and film written by somebody that I will be identifying in a moment. So in terms of having to talk about retards, because up until now I've spoken about personal responsibility, certain types of principles, how we can actually start to put things together so that we can have a system that is more practical and more representative, etc., etc. I do think it is important for people to actually understand and be warned against who are the retards. Because if you don't know who the retards are, you're not going to know who to avoid, really, are you? Especially when we're setting up that positive trade system. So as much as this is not going to be a true comprehensive deep dive, I'm now going to identify this particular individual and that I'm going to set out this great map of where everybody comes from and all this. I'm not going that far. I'm just giving a bit of an overview, basically. Now, as much as I had planned to do this anyway, it just, when I'd started doing the preparation for this, it literally happened the day after that I saw an article that came through to my inbox bringing attention to a statement that was made by this bloody Neil Cuckolder Ferguson, and it shows what can only be described as the most idiotic, stupid, thick and retarded understanding of what cost-benefit analysis is I think I've ever witnessed, and that's why I've got it up on the screen and it's up above me. That particular paragraph absolutely fucking infuriated me, and it just gives more reason as to why I'm actually I'm feeling very much justified in having this particular segment about identifying retards, because this bloke is an almighty fucking retard, and this is levels of criminal levels of retard. It really is. So what I did immediately, as you can see on this bit by the side of me, that's a copy of, and I've put this up on Minds and Nebu too as well, so I'm sure people, the 3 or 4 people that watch this crap in the first place, I'm sure you're already aware of it. So go and have a look at it, or just pause it in that, and hopefully in that you can expand the size of the screen and that to be able to see exactly what it is that I've written. But I've sent that complaint out to a whole host of people, including him and everybody else that's on Sage. And what I can say is that obviously there's been a whole bunch of the emails have bounced back from people that are just sort of members of Sage in particular, that are just sort of like, oh no, I'm responsible for this shit, but I don't want to be involved in it. I had one actual response that came through, not through, that came through from one of the individuals from Sage, where all he said was, I'm no longer the president of the Royal Society, and therefore this email is for this particular role that he does now. And so I immediately wrote back to that particular fella and said, I didn't ask you whether you was at the Royal Society or not. I asked you about your role within Sage and allowing that to go through as any kind of cost-benefit analysis. Needless to say, no more responses. But the other thing that I have noted, and I want to give a little bit of advice on, is that I have noticed that the government have started to change their freedom of information request system, whereby a number of them used to be giving out an email address that you could then write to in this fashion, so you've got a record kept of it. Now what they're doing now is they're gradually shifting all freedom of information requests over to a web-based contact form. What you have to be careful of there is that they've got a very nasty habit, and I've noticed this and that from a local level in particular, and other areas of combat that I've had with the authorities. I'm not a big fan of authorities, as if you didn't know. The thing what they do there is, that wasn't English, was it? The thing that they do there is that complaint that you make via this web-based system conveniently disappears, and it can never be found again. And they've got this, they'll have this ready-made excuse of, well, we only keep data for a certain period of time because, you know, we're not the data controller, we're the data processor. Somehow. And if you need to be able to refer to that particular complaint at any point, it will have gone. So the advice I will give you when it comes down to making any kind of freedom of information request is take a screenshot of the complaint that you've made, and then usually, because the box that they'll have on the screen is not, it's too small for you to be able to have your entire content on there. So copy your entire complaint, copy the entire content, and then paste it into a, I don't know, like a Word document or whatever it is that you use. Okay, take that screenshot and then save both of those, so that you'll be able to prove when you actually sent the complaint through, and then you can prove what was actually contained within it. So they can't then turn around and say, well, oh, that's disappeared, we don't know anything about it. You know, me no understandy type of scenario. They can't do that if you've taken that step of evidence of your complaint. So yeah, I've within this particular complaint, well, freedom of information request is the way that I've done it. I want to know the precise makeup of how they've come about this ridiculous cost-benefit analysis, which is just, oh. I mean, these people have literally destroyed lives up and down the country, and they have no idea what they're doing. And I have also included within this and that the local police and crime commissioner, so that this should actually be taken forward as a criminal complaint. And I've done that because previous contacts with the Home Office, and even though I've got it in my complaint as being to the as having advice from the Home Office and the there's one other department, I can't remember what it is. I've put two departments in there anyway as having received advice from. I did actually make a bit of a mistake, because one of the pieces of advice was the Home Office, the other one was the Crime Prosecution Service, where they both turned around and said effectively in that if you've got a criminal complaint, you have to start at the local level, which makes no sense at all for this. But if that's the way they want to do it, then that's why I've included the local police crime commissioner. Haven't had anything back from him yet, which is kind of the problem, which I'd anticipated. But it all goes toward building up that picture of the larger complaint, to be able to say your entire system is shit, you've got no route to recourse, you've intentionally set it up so there's no route to recourse, and everything that you're doing in terms of literally killing people up and down the country through direct means or indirect means we're going to have to sort this one out and have that accountability. But all these sorts of records and that need to be kept. So yeah, Ferguson, fucking retard. So, the second part to this. This particular slide is essentially for all the wusses of the world that turn around and go, oh no, you're not allowed to use the word retard anymore. Well, yes, you can use the word retard. And I do use the word retard, and I will continue to use the word retard, because it is part of the English language, and it is included in the dictionary, though I'm sure some socialist prick will now try to have it removed. But it doesn't matter. It is an actual word with an actual meaning, and you can try to take it away. I've got the record of what it means, and I will continue to use it. So I'm not interested in anybody pissing and moaning about a word that they don't like, just because it suits their little agenda, and that to try to stop people using words that essentially normally refer directly to them. But anyway, I'm not going to, like I say, I'm not going to change my language for commie twats. So, as much as you can see precisely what it is that it means, I will always claim, anybody makes a complaint on that, and I will always turn around and I will be able to justify entirely how it refers to the meaning in the sense of the verb. Retarding the process. Retarding the development of something. Quite simple. It doesn't necessarily mean the pejorative term, which has largely come out of America. So it does still largely have relative accurate meaning in terms of being mentally or socially incredibly slow. It's a simple determination that can be made, and it is a word, it's a legitimate word, and I will continue using it. So I set out this little Venn diagram of retards, which isn't extensive, exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the key retards that we have to deal with at the moment. So where they cross over, I mean, is this a perfect Venn diagram of the retards that we're going to be looking into? No. But it's going to be enough that if anybody wants to just sort of copy and paste it or anything like that, feel free. It'll piss off the retards. That's good enough. So let's get into the first part of the retards. The first part of explanation I'm going to give here, and that goes to the episode title of We Have to Talk About Retards, because that is the play on We Have to Talk About Kevin, written by Lionel Shriver, who just happens to be a member of Population Matters. So essentially what she is along with David Attenborough, trademark Christopher Monkton, he came up with that one, I'll credit him. So right up there with David Attenborough, the biggest eugenics gobshite in the world. She annoys me in particular because she goes around on various types of social media programs, particularly the ones that are having the conversations around trying to solve problems around how culture is under attack. And she pretends to be for freedom of speech and all this sort of stuff and blah 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 blah, whilst at the same time being a eugenics freak. I don't like that, so I'll bring her to attention, and so that's why I've pinched the title of her most well-known book and adjusted it accordingly. So that's the explanation as to how I've come to have the name for this week's episode. Right. There is another quote that I'm going to make some reference to because I have used it previously, and it does apply to this entire load of retards, and that is the The definition of madness is making the same mistake and expecting a different result. And so when it comes down to eugenics freaks, you're basically having a bunch of dipshits that have been spouting pseudoscience crap for 223 years. Now, when it comes down to that particular expression, I know that there's a lot of people that, and I think I've made the mistake as well before, and I was saying that it's attributed to Albert Einstein. Not that he's a eugenics freak. Some other people have said that that belongs to Ben Franklin and Mark Twain. And though it is a little bit dodgy these days to actually find out if the origins of a particular expression are true or not, I've not got time to start going into things to that extent. But there is a claim that the definition of insanity in that particular format first appeared in 1981 in a document published by Narcotics Anonymous, which is a guidebook for addicts trying to overcome their disease. It's not a disease. It's not a disease, it's a fucking choice. And warning readers that insanity is repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results. So, a retard, an idiot making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Very much in line with this. So where did this particular load of bollocks start? So at the top there, and that we can go back to 1798 with Thomas Malthus. I think that's his name, or Malthus, because it's spawned this thing called Malthusianism, and that came about in his theory, an essay on the principle of population. That set the ball rolling in this particular area of pseudoscience, and progressed into, at least on the UK side, there are people on the American side and various other countries and that, so like I say, not extensive, not exhaustive, concentrating on the British side of things. Francis Galton, and he was the one that actually came up with the term eugenics in 1883, and he formed the British Eugenics Society. So, people, long term, same mistakes, blah blah. Retards. Anyway. You can skip through a whole bunch of different levels. I just wanted to pinpoint those particular areas, because it does become a little bit relevant to what I'm going to say. So, the one part of history that's, again, I've made mention of it when I was talking about the Imperial War Museum and that in Winston Churchill. The eugenics shit is very well known and very well associated with, and that's why I've got that little flag that sits behind Population Matters, a particular group of socialists from the 1930s and 40s. And there's an awful lot of the ignorant bastards that still spew this pseudoscience crap. Maybe they would do wise to go and have a look at the War Museum and that's get a little bit of knowledge in that as to what their ideology actually results in. Now, as this has obviously progressed into the crap that we've got today, it is then pushing straight forward into the biggest eugenics gobshite in the world that we've got at the moment, which is Bill Gates. Because the Eugenics Society has been renamed and still exists to this day, and they're called the Galton Institute, obviously after Mr. Pseudoscience. And for those that are not particularly aware, the Galton Institute had a relevance into actually making the this AstraZeneca vaccine that there's so much controversy about these days. Because one of the guys that works together with the Galton Institute is also working with Vaxitech. and Vaxitech were the ones that actually did work with, or had actually basically put together this so-called vaccine, which isn't a vaccine, but nonetheless, that's what they actually produced, and then it's gone through to this claim of, oh, it was produced by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. Yeah, they kind of miss out that bit. And you've also got the Pirbright Institute involved as well. Pirbright Institute, Wellcome Trust, Bill Gates, nice little picture. Not by any, like I say, not by any stretch, it's not the entire picture, but this is the kind of relationships that you've got with this kind of retard ideology. So, what we want to take into consideration there, and that is when you've got this nonsense of people turning around and saying, oh, well, the EU and and they're not allowing our jab, and playing politics with that particular one. And that, I mean, the dumb bastards over here at least should actually just be turning around and saying, look, anybody that's not getting this, it should be a case of well done. Everywhere, anywhere, any of these fucking jabs, to be perfectly frank. Because being part of a human experiment developed by eugenic freaks doesn't exactly strike me as a brilliant idea. And you also have to remember that one of the people that I've not included on here, sorry, I've got a bit of skin on my lip there. Anyway, the within these eugenics freaks, we also have to understand the reason why an awful lot of this shit comes about is because Boris Johnson is also a eugenics freak. So the one thing I've always stated when it comes down to this particular group of retards, which is obviously, as I say, considerably wider than the people that I've got on the screen at the moment, there is only one basic principle that needs to be put into place with a retard, which is that if you've got the courage of your conviction, and if you think that this is not pseudoscience, despite the fact that it's been proven to be pseudoscience every single fucking time, what they need to do is have the courage of their conviction and have to understand, if you've got a problem with people on the planet, if you think there are too many, you're also part of the problem. So if you really do believe that the population is a problem, then remove yourself from the equation. Do something about it for yourself, via yourself, or shut the fuck up. It literally is as simple as that. Don't turn around and say, oh, population is a problem, but everybody else should die except for me. Don't be a fucking David Attenborough saying that, oh, there's too many people on the planet, and that while you're trying to do your absolute utmost to stay on it for as long as you possibly can. It just means that you're a hypocritical, lying, pseudoscience retard. So that's the basic equation that you can give to eugenics freaks. If you've got a problem with people being on the planet, too many people being on the planet, remove yourself from the equation. The rest of us will then think about it and enjoy life without your moaning asses. Right. The next one is the climatards. Again, not extensive by any stretch of the imagination. And this particular one doesn't include a whole range of people that I know that people are automatically going to say, where is? Don't worry, some of it will come in the next slide. So, just a basic little bit of a run through of this. So, we could say that we understand that, again, the definition of madness applies. You've had this Sven Arrhenius, who was the first one to use the principles of physical chemistry to estimate the extent in which the carbon dioxide increases atmospheric temperatures. He came up with that in 1903, and we can say that there's been a whole variety of people, like I say, contributing to this, including the American physicist Eunice Newton Foote in 1856. But suffice to say that Arrhenius was the one that got the Nobel Prize for it, and that's how, I'll give him some credit for something that would make up normally what logically would be a potential confounder. That if you was going to be doing some studies on the climate, you're looking at what are the different confounders that make up the entirety of climate. So for him to have made this suggestion, I don't have a problem with that at all. What I have a problem with is how that notion then progressed into the retards. So where did this absolute lunacy really start? I suppose we could turn around and say there will be different areas of people having taken that one particular theory and spouted bollocks as a result of it. But normally speaking, when you're looking towards a retard, you have to look back to say, well, okay, which is the retard that actually thought, okay, I can make money out of this, and then set it off into a nice little agenda that usually starts with and is continuing to ripping off the taxpayer, having a load of money for doing basically fuck all, or just continuously telling bullshit. Essentially what we've got here is an industry that has intentionally sets off and creates panic, so that you can have a whole bunch of fake academics getting a large sums of money from retarded politicians that seem to be convinced of all this crap, and they set off their crony socialist little cycle that continues obviously to this day. So I would say the man most responsible for having set that particular ball of bullshit rolling was Roger Revelle. So in 1957 he came together with a fellow called Hans Suess and basically turned around and said, well, okay, this is all can be put down to, because it's the same with all these retards. Like, they've always got to have there's a single problem, single solution, single this, single that, because it has to be nice and easy, because they're too fucking stupid to understand that these things about confounders. So it was basically that CO2 equation, that CO2 theory. We can blame all of that on fossil fuel, which in all reality should be called life fuel. And for any retards out there, you have to understand as well that oil and gas is a renewable. So bet you didn't know that. So that'll piss off any retards that are watching as well. So that makes me happy. So they basically turned around and came up with this notion then that fossil fuel and everything like that. That's the reason why we've got the threat to the climate. And he ended up getting loads and loads of money. Now what the following retards do tend to forget is that Revelle, he actually did know how much of a retard he was being, and he did apologise in 1988 and actually sent a letter to the I think he sent it to the president at that particular point in time, stipulating that things had just got way out of hand. But by that time the cash registers and the level of theft from the taxpayer, it had gone beyond academia, and like I say, it had become far too much of a cash cow for too many people by that time for anybody to turn around and say, okay, we need to now call a halt to all of this bullshit. It was too late. So we can say that Roger Revelle was responsible for setting that particular ball rolling. So, I mean, he'd started his poncing in California, but there was a particular position that he was hoping to get in California that he didn't get. So he moved out to Harvard in 1967. And where he ends up having a bit of a crossover into the eugenics retards is on account of the fact that the department that he set up there was called the Harvard Center for Population Studies. So He's pushed the climatard shit, and then he's gone straight into the eugenics shit. So yeah, fits within the Venn diagram. And then the other part that we need to be paying attention to here, and that of where this corruption and everything started to really upscale, was because while he was at Harvard and in this particular Centre for Population Study, that's where Al Gore comes into the picture, because Al Gore was the man that worked together with Roger Revelle. So basically in that, he got that notion of how you can actually rip everybody off, and he's basically set the ball rolling for the, you know, and you can just look at the Democrat retards that you've got today out in the States. I mean, literally every single one of them are fucking dipshit, but he basically got that that cash cow going for everybody, which is why they keep pushing that crap today. Obviously anybody that's old enough and that, you'd remember that Gore was going and doing his little travels around the world and that, telling everybody that the world was going to end. Every single one of those predictions that turned out to be complete and utter bollocks. And basically Gore had his world tour put together and all of his retarded predictions and all that sort of bollocks, and he did that off of the back of a graph that had been produced by prime retard number 2 within the climatards, which is Michael Mann, who is quite possibly the world's biggest pussy. I mean, he really is an absolute wuss. But we can't say that he was the only one responsible for this, because anybody that doesn't, you know, look up as much as they've tried, you have to be careful where you look for this one and that, because there's an awful lot of people that turn around and go, oh no, there was nothing wrong here. But have a look at the actual information and a lot of the emails in particular, if you can find them, around ClimateGate, because all of this hockey stick, you know, the one that Gore was going on about, oh look at what's going to happen here, absolute bollocks. And the assistance that was given to Michael Mann to be able to produce that bullshit was at our very own University of East Anglia. So I mean, when it comes down to the climatards, I mean, the list of universities that you could include in this would be basically in that, you know, pick any university across the world and you'll find a climatard. So that's essentially where an awful lot of the modern day bullshit came about. And so, as much as this hockey stick graph was complete bollocks, you would have expected that once that ClimateGate came out, you would expect to see some real accountability. And people actually like him and that going to prison, and including Al Gore and that, they should have been put in prison for the absolute lies that they came out with. But because these retards had basically shown other scumbags how they can rip off people, the level of corruption and everything and that had become obvious throughout the development of all of this bullshit, it has essentially caught the attention of the big boys, shall we say. And just for anybody that's in a university that watching this and that and going, oh no, you can't say this and you can't say that, don't forget, I've always got my open challenge. Any university, any students, anybody that's on the climatard side of things, present me with the scientific method, or if you can't do that, present me with the evidence for the closure problem. And if you can do that, I'll say that you have some validity to your case. But apart from that, I will always consider you to be lying, punting, scumbag retards. So anyway, the one thing that we do know is that when you do speak to most of these people, and that way you turn around and say, okay, where's your evidence for all this? They all point to the IPCC. Now, if you remember from previous episodes, I've actually got the response from the IPCC that says, no, we haven't got it. So, you know, but there's a reason why they point to the IPCC. That came into being in 1988, and it was off the back of a whole range of different little tentacles of the United Nations that were based off of this bullshit because they thought, hey, oh, here's the cash cow. And the one part that a lot of the climatards love to ignore is that it was all basically put together off of the back of the Canadian oil man, Maurice Strong, who was funded by the oil wealth creators, Rockefellers. So, at the heart of this entire lunacy, the people who have always been behind it are the very people that the climatards claim to hate. And if anybody turns around and says, no, you're talking bollocks, they say, oh, well, no, you're financed by big oil. As well, no, you are. But they don't, but, you know, reality doesn't really tend to sink into well with climatards. So, the next part to understand with the pseudoscience and how it's become this vast cash cow is that you're looking towards something like a roundabout, because like I say, when they turn around saying, oh, if you don't believe in this, that and the other, that is because you're being financed by blah blah. Not to the extent that you pricks are, because they're getting over 100 billion a year at least, and that's in direct funding, and that's direct government funding, so basically pouncing off of the taxpayer, as all retards always do. And it is literally, like I said, it's got that, the real scam of having the crony socialism between the governments and their actual masters, which is, as I said, the very people that these morons seem to think is responsible for all of this shit. But anyway, but the figures do actually then shift up several gears into the trillions once you take in government plus funding. So when you've got this sort of amount of money being spread around, and the mix of pouncing off of the taxpayer, setting up this crony socialist system, if anybody thinks that when you've got something that is creating this much money for doing nothing effectively, or for going in completely the wrong direction, then yeah, you're really not paying attention. But then, you know, retards don't pay attention to actual facts. So you've got the things like, you know, you've got your pretend technologies, which are absolutely proven to be retarded, you know, your wind and your solar. Because, you know, these things, that I mean, they cause more environmental damage than what they're replacing, and they increase the death counts from energy poverty and energy denial, which then you get your crossover into your eugenics freakery, you know, it ends up being a side benefit. Or we can pretend that something's working, kill a load of people at the same time. Great. Retard's dream. Same with your electric vehicles. Complete and utter bollocks. Go and ask the little kids out in the Congo how happy they are with it. But, so you've got this entire cash cow picture that's developed, all based off of bullshit, which means you're looking at anybody that is being sold on this on the individual level. So I'm talking about your average fellow that walks around going, oh, I think the environment needs to be protected and all this. Retard. Simple as that. Fucking retard. Actually bother your ass to think about things for a change. So you need to be paying attention to this sort of stuff and have a little bit of a knowledge about it, so that when somebody does start spouting bollocks, you can turn around and say, right, I've identified a retard. That's somebody that I might not want to be getting a little too close to, because retard is a disease. There's no vaccine against retards, apart from brains and knowledge and common fucking sense, which retards never possess. But anyway, so I've got little NIMBY in the corner, because the NIMBYs are also essentially retards, and they're normally the typical middle class twat that think that they're a class above, but forget that they're actually still working class. But never mind. And they will grab a hold of things like this, the green belt, in this country. I'm sure you've got in other countries and that they're saying, oh, you can't develop here and that because you might, there's a fly in that corner and that you might cause distress to, or some shit like that. And basically all it means is they want to build up their nice little palace in the country and just make sure that once they've done that they get to do it, but you don't. So that's all that is. And I mean, they're just self-centered retards is what that one's about. And quite often it ends up being the case is because they've been that fucking self-centered and stupid, they normally send off their kids to the indoctrination camps where they're the ones that end up being the types of morons that we'll see in the next slide. But, we have to understand what a retard will generally do, and that across the board with this sort of stuff and that. And when it comes to, if you don't understand what a NIMBY is, it's literally short for not in my backyard. That's all it means. They will generally be the sort of person, they'll also be the ones that will try to get on the television and say, oh, it's terrible and that the policies against the immigrants, the ones that are trying to come into the country and that, and they're getting on boats and coming into the country, or like the crap that's going on in America at the moment. They'll say that, but if any of those people went and lived right next door to them, my God, they'd kick up a stink then. So they don't mind when you're getting all the shit, but just don't bring it near me. That's basically the problem that you get from those people. And they do often use the climatard bullshit as part of the excuse to try to not have anything come anywhere near them. So that's why they're retards. But anyway, so you've got your climatard shit. Like I say, not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. I might do it one day. So then we move into the kind of retards that most would have expected me to put up on the climatard stuff. But let's just, because we've got the ideology as part of the Venn diagram, these people very much fit into the ideology side of things. So you can basically split ideology into the socialists, communists, and then the crony socialists. So because most of these morons and that, they've got no understanding of history, they've got no understanding of any of the issues that they scream and shout about whatsoever. Most of the times you'll end up with, if it isn't a scenario whereby they're being able to rip off people and get by on predominantly taxpayer money or donations from morons who also frankly are retards if you donate into any of these shitbags. Essentially what you've got is people that are just pissing and moaning and crying and everything and that, because the simple fact is that they are useless thick twats and they just want to be able to try to blame everybody else for the fact that they are useless thick twats and retards. So that's why they always turn to things like socialism and communism, because they're fucking idiots. So, these years ago and that, it used to be the shouts and screams about complaining about the man. The man is always the one that's wrong, and predominantly you're talking about big business in the government and all that sort of stuff. Well, effectively that has essentially turned into these days as being this blaming capitalism for everything. And I don't, once again, I will state there is no nation in the world that operates on a capitalist system. So they're immediately screaming about something that doesn't actually exist, and therefore they're retards. So it's just it's a changed narrative from the old stuff that unfortunately on this occasion you can actually turn around and say the man, which is the crony socialist part of things. But if the socialists and the communists weren't quite so retarded, they would actually know that the enemy that they're screaming and shouting about is actually working hand in hand with them. And they are the crony socialists, as I say. And, if these people weren't so fucking thick, they might actually get some understanding about stuff. So anyway, I suppose you could turn around and say the socialist and communist ones and that are effectively like the activist types. Like I say, they've got no understanding of the hypocrisy about the billions that they punt and supporting these crony socialists that they'll then pretend to be rallying against. And essentially, they don't seem to understand that what they are in this particular picture is useful idiots that the crony socialist retards will actually use to the best of their abilities, because when you've got a useful idiot and that, you can use them for all manner of purposes that then benefit the crony socialists. Now, the crony socialists, it's quite simply easy to say that most of them are made up of a whole bunch of inbreds, really, that have got zero notion of what reality is. So, in terms of the crony socialists, it is a combination of a whole range of the same old arseholes that have always caused trouble. And they basically just want to be the controller of resources through pushing all of these different ideological bullshit scenarios. And they are involved in every level of the Venn diagram. They're eugenics freaks, they're climatards, or they know that the climatard shit is bullshit, but they push it anyway because it then ends up allowing them to take control of the resources. And they're quite. It's also quite simple to point out to the activist morons that they still won't understand anyway. But the vast majority of death, destruction, and mayhem throughout the years that they all like to claim is somehow capitalism is actually largely put together and resulting from a lot of the actions that are done through the crony socialists, who've got a nasty habit of being the funders of both sides in any war, basically. But that goes all the way back to World War One and particularly World War Two. When you had the Rockefellers and what have you, for example, that and the build up to the Trilateral Commission, they were funding both sides of the war. So because basically, I mean, you can turn around and say that that particular crony socialist grouping, which again not exhaustive, but you can say that essentially in that we've had problems with that particular setup, even though you've had like new members like the World Economic Forum and what have you, that I still suggest is funded from the money that was stolen by the Nazis, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, you can suggest that we've had this problem and that for over 150 years with the standard families and so forth that are involved in this. But trying to get the activist idiots to understand all of these things, you're wasting your time, because, like I say, you are dealing with retards. So I suppose, in short, in that, where I've had to sort of put in a little bit in that to complete the Venn diagram, in terms of the biotech and the NIMBY, I suppose the obvious ones would be the World Health Organization, but then essentially in that you're looking at the United Nations being involved in all of this anyway, across the board. It doesn't matter what part of idiocy and retard that you look at, there's always some tentacle of the United Nations touching it somewhere. So we can also then include the medicines regulators. You can look at whatever, obviously now in America, and that we all know Pinocchio at the CDC. So you could change the MHRA for the CDC if you wanted to. And then you've also got your trusts that pretend that they're conserving things, but basically they're just ponces, and that's the likes of the National Trust, who've also become complete lying retards and all the rest of it. So giving you a little bit of a clue as to what goes on in terms of some of the key areas of what can easily be identified as retards and retard ideologies and retard agendas. So if you're in a position of trying to understand which people are worthy of your time, money, oh Christ. When you're looking at things of, like I said, when you're working towards this positive trade scenario, and anything you're trying to do in life, and that way you're trying to do something for the betterment of yourself and for those around you, etc., etc., you always have to keep an eye out for when somebody is coming in and trying to infect everybody else with some complete and utter retarded bollocks. I suppose it would actually tie into, I think that Sad Gad has been saying a lot of stuff recently about the idea pathogens, I think he calls it. So it is something that literally can be infecting people to have a distinctly decreased IQ, essentially. And you just, if you can identify those types of people, and that it's going to end up being better for you in the long run. So there are certain parts to any conversation where you can turn around and say, well, okay, look, there's a little bit of legitimate reasoning at a particular point within the discussion, but you literally just consider what is the level of legitimacy of that, and then in which direction should it then be taken, and then it all has to then be, so things like, oh, the consensus has said that we all think in this particular way. Well, if something is a consensus, that basically means that you're lying. Really, if you've got to have a consensus around something, it basically means that you're talking out your ass, especially when it comes down to things of a scientific nature, because there's a reason why you've got processes for providing evidence, and evidence has got nothing to do with consensus. So anybody that comes out with any sort of buzzword like that, oh, we all think this and that, and anybody that doesn't believe it is a science denier and all this sort of stuff, that's all bullshit. So you literally look towards, well, what is the core question that's needing to be answered here, and then if you can find something, if it is of any interest to you, and if it does have any benefit to you, take out those bits that sound like there is something legitimate within it. Make sure that you can actually do a little bit of research to say, well, okay, that is actually a justifiable idea, theory, hypothesis, whatever. And then have that as part of the wider picture, because then again, you have to look towards what all the confounders are. You have to understand what the cost-benefit analysis is, and not based on Cuckolder Ferguson's version of it. This whole absolutely ridiculous way that things are progressing. Well, they're not progressing, are they? They're regressing. They're regressing into this, here's a single idea, here's the single solution, here's the single product or whatever, and that's going to then provide that cure, and then that's going to solve that problem. No, everything has got multiples. Everything has got a whole range of different confounders that feed into any particular problem. Anything that is considered to be a solution is going to have a whole range of different confounders and areas of consideration that need to be considered properly. And so if you come across anybody that is saying, right, that's a single problem, that's a single solution, they're going to be talking crap. So if you understand that, then you'll be a little bit better armed, forewarned, essentially, in terms of how you deal with a retard and not become a retard yourself. So probably quite long. Who cares? And I think that'll do for this week. So hopefully I managed to read through that in some relative level of comprehension. Like I say, it wasn't extensive, wasn't exhaustive, not the entire picture. You just need to understand that little Venn diagram and how everybody is a little retard around it, and just avoid them like the plague as much as you can. Or do what I do sometimes and just find them in pubs and piss them off, because you can just ask them what is the scientific method. They can't answer. But anyway, so that'll do it for this week, and I'll have to give some consideration of what kind of area I'm going to go into in the solutions segment next week. So anyway, have a think about it, do the usual commenting and what have you. Not that you ever do. Christina does, but nobody else seems to. But anyway, I should also point out, before I forget, the point around the confounders again. This kind of feeds back into this. There's always relevance to these things. It feeds back into the actual political situation that it is that I'm trying to do with this Hoskins wiring map, because not being distracted by single issues that whatever agenda wants you to look in a particular direction to distract you from what they're doing in other areas. This is why I'm going through this entire process and going through all of these different departments, so that we can identify what all of those confounder problems are, instead of just saying, oh, it's a single issue here. Oh, we've got a problem with migration. Oh, we've got a problem with this particular part of the economy. Oh, we've got a particular problem with this and that and the other. No, have a look at the entirety and understand what all of the confounding parts are. And then you won't be a retard. So, that should actually wrap that one up properly, I hope. So, have a good week, and I will see you in episode 33, I think. So, yeah, cheers, bye.